I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. I'm joined today by the Scottish Green Party co-leader, Ross Greer, the third of our Holyrood election leaders interviews. So, Ross, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
I think this goes out on Wednesday morning. So what's your assessment of where the Scottish Greens are in the campaign with 8 days to go?
I mean, at the moment, pretty much every poll has our support continuing to climb, or at least at record levels. Just as we're recording this, we've had another poll out that had us up a point with Survation to 12. Bearing in mind that the last election, we got 8%, and that was our best ever result. So even our worst polls at the moment are indicating we're on track for a record result. Our best polls have us in second place, ahead of Reform and Labour. I think what's behind a lot of that is not just that we have this vision that we're putting forward, things like universal free bus travel, fixing childcare, but the track record. People know that if they vote Green, we actually deliver this stuff. You know, we delivered free bus travel for young folks. We scrapped peak rail fares. We scrapped school meal debt that a lot of families were struggling with, and we expanded free school meals. So it's that combination of, probably for the first time, the Greens being able to go into an election with quite a substantial track record of achievements, but also actually putting forward a vision for what we would do differently. It's quite surprising from other parties how some of them have really failed to put forward an alternative vision to what the current government are offering.
So the last time I interviewed you, I think it was January, you said that the SNP have a less than 1% chance of winning a Holyrood majority. Do you still believe those figures?
It's definitely still in that ballpark. I think John Curtis said there's a 2.5% chance of a unionist first minister, or someone other than John Swinney being the first minister. I think at the opposite end of the kind of spectrum of outcomes, an SNP single party majority is still in that ballpark. You know, the overwhelming majority of the polls are showing a very clear pro-independence majority. But what makes the difference, what makes it a majority, is Green MSPs, and particularly the gains that we are making. The SNP are on track to probably lose a couple of seats. They're in the ballpark of what they got last time, but it looks like they'll probably go down a little bit. Certainly their vote is down. But what's making a difference, what is actually guaranteeing that pro-independence majority, is the Green MSP group, the number of people who are going to vote Green, particularly on that peach-coloured regional ballot paper.
Some of the polls have shown an SNP majority, and others, like the one this morning, show the SNP on the cusp of an overall majority. So seems to be a higher chance than less than 1%.
It's still in that ballpark. If you look at the final couple of seats the SNP would need to win to get to the majority, it's really hard to see it. It's easy to see how they get to 62, 63, even 64 and come just one seat short like they did last time. How they get to 65 plus, the final couple of seats they'd need to win, that's what seems like a real stretch for them. The polls, I think almost all the polls that have shown an SNP majority so far are these MRP, the regression polling, which I think pretty much every expert in Scottish polling is saying these are junk. But the key thing is we know the SNP are on track to come first. I'm not disputing that. Guaranteeing the pro-independence majority in Parliament is in almost every poll, like 9 out of 10 polls, it comes down to the Green MSPs. So making sure we have that, the most effective way to do it is voting Green on that regional ballot, but not just for the sake of an independence majority. Our vision and our strategy is different to theirs. The key thing for the Greens is we think we need to grow support for independence itself, not just get a majority for it in Parliament. And the way we do that is helping people save money right now. We need to exhaust the powers that the Parliament already has. They are limited powers, but that's why we're pushing for stuff like universal free bus travel, fixing childcare, really stretching at the limits of devolution in some areas, because we need to prove to people that Scottish self-government works, that when we govern in their interest, the people of this country, we can help them save money, we can make their lives easier. There's quite a contrast between that and what's going on at Westminster at the moment. So yes, there's a kind of simple parliamentary arithmetic thing here of we need to make sure there's a majority for independence in the Parliament, because clearly without that, there's no chance for referendum. But we actually need to grow support for independence amongst the population at large. It's 50-50 right now. The Greens think the best way to do that is to maximise, exhaust the powers we've got to bluntly save people money and just make the cost of getting by a little bit easier.
I mean, John Swinney was at an event this morning. There was a press conference. I think it was live on PA. He was talking about his plan for IndyRef2, how there'd be a vote on the first day of the Parliament going back. But he was a bit softer on this idea that it required an overall SNP majority. He was asked about it repeatedly, wouldn't repeat that. Do you sense that he's softening on this SNP policy?
John Swinney can read the polls as well as anybody else, probably better than most people. He's been in politics a long time. He knows what he's talking about. He can see the vast majority, we're talking like 90% of polling, is showing that it's the Greens that make up that majority. And I think he probably now is really beginning to think, well, hold on a minute, is the SNP at risk of delegitimising the independence movement? The position the Greens have always held is that it should be up to voters to decide this, not any one party. If voters send a majority of pro-independence MSPs to Parliament, regardless of what combination of parties that is, that should be the mandate, because that's how our democracy normally works. If you can have a mandate in Parliament for a particular position, you can get it passed. We could be in the ludicrous situation, though, where the SNP, as most polls show, fall short of a majority, and they themselves have undermined that independence mandate. I think that's why you're starting to see that softening of their position, because it's simply recognising Scottish democracy. At heart, John Swinney is clearly somebody who really passionately believes in Scottish democracy and in the right of the people of this country to decide their future. I think he's looking at the highly likely prospect of an independence majority, but the Greens being what make up that majority, what make up the difference between the SNP and that magic number of 65 in the Parliament. And he quite rightly doesn't want to delegitimise what the public appear to be highly likely to vote for. The last thing you want is to have a pro-independence majority in Parliament, but the pro-independence First Minister has delegitimised that. I think now he is recognising the likelihood of it. As I said, though, I think more important than just the simple arithmetic is how we actually grow support for independence. That's what I want to see from the SNP. For the Greens, it's quite simple. We will grow support for independence if the Scottish Government can cut people's bills, cut people's costs right now, can solve the problems they face. We know we cannot do that to the extent that we need to without the full powers of independence, but there's a lot more that we can do, which is why we're pushing, free bus travel, etc., that hopefully we'll come on to later on.
Do you think that with his current position that he is at risk of delegitimising the independence movement?
I think John Swinney needs to sit down and think about what he will be able to say as the likely next First Minister on the 8th and the 9th of May or the 10th when Parliament reconvenes. If we are sitting with a pro-independence majority in Parliament, then surely anyone who believes in the cause of Scottish independence fundamentally believes that Scotland has democratic rights and we should be able to exercise them. He wouldn't want to be sitting in a situation where he has undermined the legitimacy of that. The Greens' position all along has been that we respect what voters choose. If it's not a pro-independence majority, clearly there's not going to be a referendum. Almost all the evidence, all the polling, the vast majority of these polls are showing it's the Greens that make up the difference. It's the Greens that make sure there is actually that majority, particularly on the regional, the peach-coloured ballot paper. I want John Swinney, if he is the next First Minister, that's not up to me, that's up to the public, but if he is the next First Minister, I want him to be able to exercise that right, to use that democratic mandate to say, well, hold on a minute, the people of Scotland have once again voted for a pro-independence majority. We should give the people a say over our future, because critically, a pro-independence majority in Parliament doesn't mean we become independent the day after the election. It's a majority to allow the people of this country to make that choice directly. We know, for example, there's quite a large minority of Labour voters who are pro-independence. I think a lot of them wouldn't want their vote for the Labour Party to be assumed as a vote against independence. They would want to be able to make that choice. Ultimately, though, people are just struggling right now, and we're in danger of getting so lost in talking about the process of how we achieve independence that we forget why those of us who want it. As I said, for the Greens, it's about making people's lives easier. We can do quite a lot of that right now. I welcome the fact that he's said first 100 days, we would exercise that democratic mandate. We would push for that Section 30 order to get the referendum powers from Westminster. The Greens are saying that first 100 days also needs to be about cutting people's costs right now. We need to...
What is your number one priority in the first 100 days?
we want to expand free bus travel to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. What we're saying is universal free bus travel. Countries like Malta and Luxembourg have it. There's parts of Australia bringing it in now because of the fuel crisis that Donald Trump has caused. The Greens have proven in Scotland free bus travel for young people is a huge success. So clearly we're not going to be able to deliver it universally within that first 100 days, but we can start that expansion. The Highlands and Islands at the moment has a £2 bus fare cap because the Greens secured that in this year's budget, earlier this year in budget negotiations, or last year rather.
I suppose what I'm saying, Ross, is that, I mean, no one denies that you're for IndyRef2 and you want a second referendum in the next 5-year term, but it would be a fair characterization of your position that in the first 100 days, your top priority is not IndyRef2, but it is the cost of living crisis and putting money into people's pockets.
To use an Americanism, I think government can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think the Scottish government, in the event of a pro-independence majority, can and must, with urgency, pursue independence because it has a mandate to do that and there's an urgent need for it. At the same time, we can be doing things that cut people's bills, cut people's costs right now. For the Greens, that is things like universal free bus travel, but also childcare. We want to see a massive expansion of childcare, particularly for under fives. Clearly, you can't do all of that in 100 days. The easiest thing to do to fix childcare for some families right now would be to have the funded childcare kick in the week after a child's third birthday, not the term after. If your wee one is born in April, May time, you're going to spend thousands of pounds more than families whose wee ones are born in the autumn because you have to wait until that next term before the funded childcare kicks in. That's the kind of thing that we could do in the first 100 days. Free childcare from the week after a child's birthday, not the term after. And then build on that, obviously. To me, all of that is about meeting people's needs here and now. It is also about building the case for independence. As I said, the Greens' kind of core theory for how we build support for independence beyond the very marginal majority it is in the polling average at the moment is by showing people that Scottish self-government works. And Westminster's doing our job for us of being calamitous, not serving the interests of ordinary people, constant chaos and scandal. We need to show a really sharp contrast with that, though. I want to fix childcare because in and of itself, that's clearly a good thing for families, for our whole economy, etc. It also helps us grow support for independence because it would be a pro-independence majority in Parliament that would be fixing childcare, that would be delivering free bus travel, etc. All of that proves Scottish self-government works and is better than leaving some of these decisions in the hands of politicians at Westminster.
So you've been clear that you would like to see the Scottish Greens back in government if a suitable deal is struck with the SNP. What do you think the percentage chances are of you and Gillian Mackay being ministers after the election?
Oh, you're really stretching me now. Having said less than 1% on the SNP majority, I've not really played out the probabilities on that. I mean,
are you, put it this way, are you confident that you and Gillian Mackay will be in government after the election?
I'm confident the Greens will be playing a massively influential role in the next Parliament. Whether that is from government or from opposition, I genuinely couldn't say at this point.
Is it more likely or not that you'll be in government?
On that, I'm not sure because clearly that's going to be in the hands of the voters in the first instance. But then also, whichever party comes first at the election has the right to try and get a majority in Parliament to appoint their own First Minister on whatever terms they want. Whether it's in government or opposition, though, I think the difference between the Greens and other opposition parties for the last couple of years, and indeed most of the time I've been in Parliament, is we will cooperate with the government where there is enough common ground to actually advance our policies. We don't take this attitude of they say black, we say white, and throw away our ability to deliver things. As far as we're concerned, we were elected to do a job. The job is to deliver on our manifesto. We want to deliver things like more affordable, more flexible childcare. We want to deliver free bus travel. Clearly, as I've said before, it's easier to deliver your priorities from government than from opposition. You need to take the rough with the smooth with that. There's all sorts of challenges that come from being in government. But whatever side of the chamber we are sitting on, our job will be to maximise the number of green policies that we deliver, because obviously that's how we think we can best help people. It's how we can best lift kids out of poverty, help families save money, tackle the climate crisis. It's hard to put odds on our chances of being in the next government, but we've been very upfront about the fact that you can do more from government than from opposition. We wouldn't join a government just to help another party deliver their own manifesto, though. We would only be joining a government if we were confident that whatever it was, the coalition deal, the policy programme, whatever, included that big chunk of green policies, because that's what we have a mandate from voters to deliver. And it looks like we're going to have a bigger mandate than we've ever had before.
Do you think there are SNP cabinet secretaries who would like to see the Greens back in government?
Given my personal friendships with cabinet secretaries and the small number of them,
I'm not asking you names. Just, do you think there are some SNP cabinets who like to see you back in the tent?
I think I'm going to venture as far as saying there are definitely people across the SNP who preferred it when we were in government together and delivering that more progressive platform, that more progressive government than a government without the Greens, absolutely. And it doesn't take a lot. You can just look back to Twitter on the days before the Butte House Agreement collapsed, where you saw SNP MSPs, including ministers, talking up the value of having the SNP and the Greens in government together. It's for them to say whether their position on that has changed, and the election result may even change people's position. But I don't think it's a secret that there are a lot of people in the SNP, including elected representatives, who see a huge amount that they agree with in the Greens policy platform. In fact, there are SNP policies that are in the Green Manifesto, but not in the SNP's manifesto. SNP members have always wanted their government to go much further on things like land reform. It's mad that in a country of 5.5 million people, just over 400 own half the private land. The Green Manifesto has always gone further than the SNPs on things like land reform. We can see from SNP conference decisions that they want to go further on stuff like that. For example, kindergarten would be a great example of it. SNP party policy is to raise the primary school starting age and have a kindergarten stage like they do in countries like Finland, with far better education outcome than ours. That's also the Greens policy, and it's in the Greens manifesto. It's not in the SNP's manifesto, despite being something their conference voted for.
In the SNP's manifesto, yeah.
So a lot of people in the SNP who will want a kindergarten stage because they know that's what's best for younger children, they learn best through play, etc. The good thing about this election is they can vote Green on their regional ballot paper, and they can do it knowing that both votes SNP, voting SNP on that regional ballot paper is almost certainly not going to elect SNP MSPs because they'll win so many constituencies. So there's a tactical reason for that regional vote, but also for a lot of them, and I would hazard a guess that includes quite a few of their own elected reps, they can vote for a Green manifesto that they see a lot to agree with in. So
the Greens are standing in all the regional lists, but only in a handful of the constituencies. Which constituency do you live in?
Yeah, I'm in Clydebank, Mulgai.
And there's no Green candidate in that constituency, is there?
No, and I can see where you're going.
So who are you going to vote for?
That'll be between me and the privacy of the polling.
Come on, you're a politician. I mean, you could quite easily say who you're going to vote for.
And if I did, the headline would be Green leader votes for X party that isn't the Greens. We know that understanding of the fact that you get 2 votes in a Scottish Parliament election, etc., is low. And with the greatest of respect to colleagues in other parties, including the one that I will vote for, because I don't intend on spoiling my ballot, it's not my job to promote any party other than the Greens. So when I'm speaking here, I'm not speaking as a voter. I'm speaking as the co-leader of the group.
Could you possibly vote for Labour in the constituencies?
And at the risk of you doing process of elimination, I will categorically rule out voting for a Labour Party that has been directly complicit in Israel's genocide in Palestine. That's literally armed and trained Israeli soldiers here in the UK.
Could you vote Reform?
At this point, though, obviously not going to vote Reform. I'm going to stop there, though. So you can try and draw more out of me. The process of elimination, you're going to end up trying to get me to say who I'm voting for. And
no, could you vote Tory? Could you vote Tory in your seat?
I think you know the answer. It's not my job to help papers come up with headlines that, frankly, wouldn't be in my interest. It's my job to get people to vote.
You're not categorically ruling out voting Tory.
I think I'm categorically ruling out voting Tory.
Why can't you just say, I'm going to vote SNP?
It's not my job to say who I'm voting for, because whatever party I do end up voting for, as I said, that would just end up with headlines of Green leader votes for X party that isn't the Greens, and that just causes confusion. My job as the leader of this party, co-leader of this party, is to maximise the number of votes for the Greens. Everyone in Scotland can vote Green. They can all vote Green. We can all vote Green on our regional, the peach-coloured ballot paper. Me saying who I'm going to vote for in the constituency, I know it sounds cute. I know it sounds like a politician's evasive answer, but it's just because if I do say who I am voting for, and I'm pretty sure I now know who I'm voting for, having looked at other parties' manifestos,
SNP.
I'm just going to end up creating a headline that is not in my party's best interests, and that's definitely not my job.
Who did you vote for at the general election?
There was a Green candidate on my ballot paper at the general election, so I voted Green.
There we go. Just on Zack Polanski, are you riding on his coattails?
It's funny that the number of folk who've asked that question, that when we talk up the fact the Scottish Greens are at a polling high, we're at a membership high, more than 10,500 members. We had 900 when I joined. People say, that's not because of you and Gillian Mackay, it's because of Zack Polanski. To which my response is, why would that bother me? If people are seeing this really effective Green politician on TV, on programs like The Last Leg, that I'm never going to get invited onto, even if we're polling first in Scotland, and as a result, someone in Scotland sees Zack, likes what he's got to say, and decides they're voting Green, they're obviously voting for the Scottish Greens. That's to our advantage. I think a big part of our growth, though, is because, as I said, of what we've already delivered. The advantage the Scottish Greens have over our English and Welsh colleagues is that track record of delivery. People here know we delivered free bus travel. Quite a lot of people know that we scrapped peak rail fares. We're really trying to boost recognition of the fact that it was the Greens that put that one on the table and got that over the line. So I think it's a combination, certainly. Part of the growth in our support is because we've delivered stuff that has saved people money that they benefit from every day. Part of it is absolutely because Zack is getting on these UK-wide platforms and people are really liking what he's got to say. He is a breath of fresh air, particularly for people who are disillusioned Labour supporters who might not have voted Labour with a lot of enthusiasm in 2024, but they did it to get rid of the Tories. And now they've got a government that doesn't feel very different. Seeing that Green leader down in London who is articulating what they want to see. They want to see the super rich taxed more fairly so we can fund our public services, that kind of stuff.
Is he not a chancer? I mean, he was a Lib Dem who backed the Tory and Lib Dem coalition back in the day.
What's that phrase about every saint has a past, every sinner has a future, etc.? People's politics, of course it changes, but Zack has demonstrated an incredible level of commitment to Green politics, and he's been very upfront about years ago mistakes that he made. I think you'll find very few people out there who have stuck with one party their entire life. I'm in that very few. I was 15 when I joined the Greens. Obviously, that probably made me pretty odd at the time, back in 2009.
Are you the Green William Hague then?
Not the first time that comparison's been made, and I don't know which of us would be more insulted by it.
Just on Polanski again, though, I mean, what did you make of that stuff about him being a hypnotist and promising to make women's breasts larger? Was that not a bit odd? It
was odd, and he's apologized for that. So that wasn't his idea. That was the Sun newspaper came up with that story, and from my understanding, basically did a call round of hypnotherapists until they could find somebody who would go along with it for them. He did, and he has said, look, that was a mistake. He was led up the garden path by them, but he takes responsibility for it. It was daft. It was quite odd. But in the grand scheme of political scandals, the fact he did that years before he was in politics, he has apologised for it, kind of pales in comparison to the political scandals that other parties are seeing at the moment. It pales in comparison to appointing Peter Mandelson as your ambassador to the US when you already knew that he'd stayed friends with Jeffrey Epstein after Epstein's child abuse convictions. So yeah, it's a really great tabloid story because it is strange. In perspective, though, given it was years before he was in politics, he has owned it and apologised for it. He's not tried to avoid it at all. And in comparison to the other political scandals at the moment, I think a lot of people see so much discussion of that and think, hold on a minute here, is this not distracting us from some much more meaningful things that are going on in politics?
Just a couple of policy questions, Ross. The Green Manifesto says that you will support an immediate end to new oil and gas extraction. Could you ever enter into a pact with the SNP if they were supportive of new oil and gas extraction?
Clearly, the Greens are never going to be in a government that doesn't take action to tackle the climate emergency. We're never going to be part of a government, or we certainly wouldn't vote, for example, to issue new North Sea oil and gas licenses. That particular decision is reserved to the UK government, though. So obviously Greens are not going to be part of a UK government that does that. polling UK-wide at the moment indicates pretty strong chance the Greens playing a major role in the next UK government. We're polling ahead of Labour UK-wide right now, so maybe we could be leading a progressive government, and they would need to adopt our positions on these kind of things. If you go back to 2021, though, at the point that we went into government with the SNP, we agreed to disagree on oil and gas because they still supported at that point this maximum extraction policy for the North Sea. Within a couple of months, Nicola Sturgeon had changed the SNP's position, recognised the climate science, and opposed new North Sea oil and gas. I would like to think the Greens had a positive influence there. Nicola was obviously very serious about tackling the climate emergency in her own right, but she brought the Greens into government, and I think we had a positive influence in that situation. I think for a lot of SNP voters who, in large part, voted SNP because of Nicola, for example, because of her commitment to tackle the climate emergency, there is a real disappointment with the direction they've taken now, particularly given it won't lower bills. I mean, a lot of these new fields we're talking about wouldn't be operational for years or even a decade. And even if they are operational, they're not going to lower our bills because that's just not how the energy market works. Getting back to the core question that you're asking there, though, the Greens would not be part of a government that was bringing new North Sea oil and gas fields into play, making them active. It's a bit of a hypothetical, though, given those powers don't yet sit with the Scottish government. Now, in an independent Scotland, clearly no, the Greens are not going to greenlight new North Sea oil and gas fields. Until we're independent, we're going to do everything we can to stop new North Sea oil and gas fields and to make sure that every penny of investment goes into renewables, not just because that's how you tackle the climate emergency, but that's where the high quality lasting jobs are. Even if you disagree with the Greens and climate science, it's not really about politics, it's climate science. Even if you deny the climate science, the North Sea is simply just running out. Our part of the North Sea basin is running out. Other political parties are sticking their heads in the sand on this, and that is betraying workers. It is a betrayal of workers to pretend that their industry will keep going when we know, as a geological reality, it will not. We should be preparing new high-quality jobs for them to move into. If you look at Mossmoran and Fife, the Exxon site, everybody knew Exxon was going to pull out. The Greens worked with the trade unions there for years and with the local community. We came up with transition plans. Other parties, the SNP and Labour in particular, buried their heads in the sand. They didn't want to turn around to those workers and say, look, sooner or later, this plant is probably going to close or at least have to change. The Greens were honest about that. We built a really good relationship with those unions, with that community. We came up with a plan. Exxon pulled out and the Scottish government hadn't put pen to paper on their own plan. Now we've got hundreds of workers made redundant with nowhere else to go and governments scrambling to catch up. And the fact that the Greens are serious about this, I think was really demonstrated by the fact that for the first time we were invited to speak at the Scottish Trade Union Congress. That was pretty historic that last week or 2 weeks ago, you had a Green leader, my co-leader, Gillian Mackay, speaking to Scotland's trade union movement. That's never happened before. Labour are the only party historically that get invited. The SNP have got invited for the last 20 years because they have the First Minister. The Greens are the only party in 129 years, other than Labour, who've got a direct party political invite to address the trade union movement. That's because on issues like this, we treat workers with respect. We're not burying our heads in the sand. We are seriously trying to create the jobs that they are going to need in the future, regardless of which party's in government, because it doesn't matter what party's in government. The North Sea is in decline as a geological reality. It's as simple as that.
Completely different policy question, Ross. Why did you and the Greens vote against Ash Regan's Unbuyable Bill?
The evidence that we got from sex workers themselves made it very, very clear that it would make them less safe. Our priority here is harm reduction. Sounds like a really kind of cold phrase when we're talking about people, but it is about harm reduction, reducing the harm to, reducing the risk to sex workers. And in particular, we're told all the time that the Scottish government and the Parliament don't listen enough to the people who are directly affected by the decisions that they made. Well, the Greens, and indeed a majority in Parliament, the bill was voted down, listened to what sex workers were telling us. They told us this will make us less safe. It will make it harder for us to make security arrangements. It will force us further underground, further away from those who can actually provide us with security and safety, etc. Please don't do this. That was essentially what sex workers were saying to us.
You're basically saying that you listen to sex workers and that influence your position. So when you speak to Faz Lane workers, what do they say about Trident?
Mixed views, interestingly. So I've represented the area that includes Fastlane for a decade in Parliament. I've had some really interesting conversations there. Of course, with some workers who do believe in the need for a nuclear arsenal and others who don't. I've spoken to other workers at the site and people whose jobs depend on the work around the site who have very transferable skills, who would be able to work in other capacities within the Navy. Our position is that in an independent Scotland, Fastlane would be the headquarters of our Scottish naval forces. We obviously we would not need a nuclear arsenal. So there are mixed views on that one, as you would expect. Mixed views across the country on the need for a nuclear arsenal. That one's quite simple though for us. Like, Trident nuclear weapons are a genuine evil. Like, to have weapons that are capable of wiping out all life on Earth is to us just unacceptable. And then when you take into account the hundreds of billions, not millions, hundreds of billions of pounds that we're going to spend renewing that arsenal, and then you look at the levels of poverty just down the road from Fastlane and think how much good that money could do if we spent it on people rather than spent it on weapons of mass slaughter.
Surely what would be evil would be getting rid of our own nuclear weapons unilaterally while allowing Putin to keep his.
Well, I mean, as you know, I've been sanctioned by Putin, so I'm certainly not an ally of that regime. I think if you look around the world, though, you see the vast majority of the world's nations don't have nuclear weapons. So the idea that we need nuclear weapons to be safe is clearly not the case. And the idea that we need nuclear weapons as a deterrent against Putin and Russia in particular is certainly not the case. The most effective thing that the UK could do right now, beyond continuing to provide support to Ukraine, is make sure that we have absolutely clamped down on Russian money laundering in the City of London, on the shadow fleet of tankers that are being used to get gas in particular out of Russia onto the international market. That's holding up a lot of their economy. There's so much that the UK could be doing further to combat the threat of Russian aggression and to make sure that we are supporting Ukraine. Doing a lot of that, though, would start impacting the profits made by people who are much closer to the UK government and the UK political system than those who are necessarily at the right hand of Putin. So we can effectively take on Putin. We can make sure we're playing our part in supporting Ukraine. Continuing to spend a literally obscene amount of money on a nuclear arsenal is not the way to do that. And it doesn't keep us safe, because we know there are areas of our defence in the UK that have been massively neglected. Cyber defence in particular, that's a really obvious area. The most immediate Russian threat to the UK is obviously not a nuclear war. The most immediate Russian threat to the UK is hacking of our key infrastructure, energy infrastructure, IT infrastructure, for example, hacking of indeed our parliaments and governments. We've massively neglected that. Spending money on that rather than spending hundreds of billions on a nuclear arsenal that ultimately we would need the cooperation of the Americans to use and to maintain. That's not how we keep people safe. We will keep people safe if we invest in making sure that we're countering the threats that we actually face right now. The Russians are not about to invade. They don't pose a territorial threat to the UK. They pose a territorial threat to countries on the eastern borders of Europe. We support those countries. Keeping ourselves safe, that's about cybersecurity in particular. It's cracking down on Russian money laundering, cracking down on shadow fleet, making sure that we can transition all of Europe off of Russian gas. There's still too much dependence on Russian gas in Europe. Scotland in particular can play a key role in that. We are capable of generating far more energy from renewables than we actually need. So we need to get that generation capacity online. That creates loads of jobs and wealth. And then we need to make sure we've got the energy infrastructure, the interconnectors to literally get that energy to mainland Europe. So there's a huge amount we can do for our collective defence that currently, frankly, the money is being taken away from to spend on this Trident nuclear arsenal that is literally evil, pretty much unusable. The only scenario we would be using it in is an end of the world kind of scenario. It would be far better for us to invest in the things that would actually keep people safe here and now, that would create high quality jobs here and now.
Final question on sex work. If you had a daughter, would you be relaxed about her being a sex worker?
I don't think those kind of questions are helpful, to be honest. I mean, so I'm not a parent, right? People know that. But to me, where that question gets to is a place that is really stigmatizing and shaming of sex workers, and everybody can have their view on whether or not that is something that you would want people close to you to do. I don't have a daughter, but I know there are people out there in my community and in every other community right now doing sex.
Would you be relaxed about a daughter that you had being a sex worker?
Well, it's a hypothetical that I'm not going to get into, because there are very real people out there in my community right now who are being massively stigmatized, who are not coming forward to get the help, the support, the protection and things they need because of how much shame and stigma is attached to being a sex worker. I don't have a daughter. It's not hypothetical that I think there's any value in me getting engaged in, but there is very real harm being done to sex workers in our communities right now. And the amount
do you see sex work as just being like the equivalent of working in Tesco's or Morrison's?
Look, the Greens' position is that sex work is work. Not that it's exactly the same as working a retail job or anything like that. Our key position is that sex workers should be as safe as possible. And we know that further criminalization, whether of the sex workers of the Johns, as they're referred to, that doesn't make sex workers more safe. Like this, for totally understandable reasons, becomes a really, really emotive subject. And I respect people who take the opposite view from the Greens and from sex workers organizations on this. But what I'm not going to do is engage in hypotheticals that just result in further shame and stigmatization of sex workers. I think that they are put in enough danger and they're shunned enough in our society. I want to do what is going to make them as safe as possible. I want to provide them with the support they need. And if that includes, if there are people doing sex work who don't want to do it, I want to provide them with the support to not do it. But that is not all the evidence that Parliament received. The Parliament received evidence from people who would say that is what they want to do. A lot of people might find that really hard to get their heads around. My job is not to start casting moral judgments in a situation like that. My job is to make sure that people are as safe as possible. And in particular, just to make sure that the political debate doesn't shame them and make it harder for them to get the support that they need.
So quick fire round just at the end. 5 quick questions. Who was the better First Minister in your view, Nicola Sturgeon or John Swinney?
Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola was opposed to North Sea oil and gas. She was serious about tackling the climate emergency. She brought the Greens into government. John Swinney was the Deputy First Minister who delivered a lot of that agenda for her with me and the rest of the Greens. But clearly, Nicola Sturgeon's position on a whole range of issues far closer to the Scottish Greens, much as I respect John Swinney.
Was Alex Salmond a good man?
No.
Why?
To be absolutely clear on that, and frankly, it stuns me how few people are willing to say this. We know what the results were in court. His behaviours were found to have not met a criminal threshold, but even he didn't defend his behaviour. And I think anybody would think, would they want to be at the receiving end of that behaviour? Absolutely not. It was completely unacceptable for any man to behave towards women like that, certainly in a position of power like that one. So his behaviour didn't meet a criminal threshold. That didn't make it okay. It was still wrong. And even he and his defence team in court didn't defend his behaviour as being right. They just successfully argued that it didn't meet a criminal threshold. I think we set a higher standard for people's behaviour than just not being criminal, particularly when we're talking about people who literally occupy the highest office in Scotland. And I'm really concerned for the women across our society who are suffering from sexual violence and sexual harassment right now, and who, as a result of everything that happened through the Alex Salmond trial and the continuing fallout from it, are now less likely to come forward because they think that it won't be taken seriously, even if it doesn't meet a criminal threshold, but it's still totally unacceptable behaviour. My fear is that a lot of women are now less likely to come forward because they've seen how the Alex Salmond situation was handled. I think that's not just tragic, it's outrageous. And I think that every politician who continues to engage in this for purely party political reasons needs to stop and think about the impact that it's having on the women who were involved in that situation, but on other women suffering from sexual violence and gender-based violence across the country right now.
Question 3, who would the Greens find it easier to work with as a future First Minister, Mary McCallan or Stephen Flynn?
No point in beating around the bush on that one. Clearly, Mary McCallan, we have significant areas of policy disagreement with her. We are in different political parties, but Stephen Flynn has spent most of the last couple of years arguing for a massive tax cut for the oil and gas industry, for these hugely profitable companies, for more drilling in the North Sea. I cannot see any way, shape, or form in which you could argue that he's serious about tackling the climate emergency. The Greens have had our differences with Mary McCallan, including on climate policy, because she was responsible for it in government for a while. But Stephen Flynn is obviously far further away from not just the Greens, more importantly, he is a million miles away from what the climate science says that we actually need to do.
Question 4. Who's a bigger threat to world peace, Trump or Putin?
Putin is a bigger threat to world peace, but they are both war criminals. Putin is a threat insofar as he is currently waging a horrific, violent war against the people of Ukraine. Donald Trump is waging a horrific, violent war against the people of Iran. We cannot forget the fact that just a couple of weeks ago, his Air Force bombed a girls' school. They bombed a school for 7 to 12-year-old girls and killed more than 100, I think more than 150 of these little girls. Add that to the long, long list of other war crimes that Trump has committed, and critically, the war crimes that he has armed and allowed Israel to commit in Palestine, in Lebanon, and elsewhere. Trump and Putin are both threats to world peace, undoubtedly. I think, on balance, I would say that Putin is the greater threat. I can understand why people believe that Trump is the greater threat, given that clearly he is the leader of a far more powerful nation than Russia and is also right now engaged in war crimes. These aren't hypotheticals. Donald Trump is killing people right now. Vladimir Putin is killing people right now. The difference is our country is not allied with Vladimir Putin. We can do something about Trump far more effectively than we can do something about Putin. And I say that as someone who has been sanctioned by Putin and his government. I'm one of, I think, 200 people in the UK who they've sanctioned because of the work I've done with the people of Ukraine.
Yes. And finally, Ross, you're a Christian. Have you ever had a crisis of faith?
I've had periods where I think my faith has changed, where I've had periods where I've been far closer to my church, certainly, and I've had periods where I've felt closer to God and periods where I've not. I think I tried being an atheist once for about 10 seconds when I was in high school, and it just didn't stick. It just didn't feel credible to me. I'm really fortunate that in the sometimes difficult job that I do, that I have that kind of anchor in my life of my faith. And this is very personal to me, not speaking as the co-leader of the Scottish Greens here, I'm just speaking as an individual, to know that I am loved by my creator, that we are all loved by our creator, that we are called to love each other. That's what underpins how I do everything in my life. I don't believe that you can love God without loving your neighbor. And we all know, even folk who don't share my faith know the parable of the Good Samaritan, that classic Sunday school story. That explains who your neighbor is. Your neighbor is absolutely everybody, especially your enemies. We're called to love everyone. We're not called to judge. We're called to love. I find that both reassuring and challenging. And I think faith without any challenge whatsoever is pretty questionable. So if I was going through my life every day and my faith didn't pose me any challenges, I think I probably wouldn't be doing it right. Because as Christians, we're ultimately called to follow Jesus Christ and to be as Christ-like as possible. Clearly, we're all going to fall short in that regard, but we keep trying anyway.
Excellent. I think that wraps it up. So thanks very much to Ross for joining me. And thanks also to Darryl from the Records video team who produced this episode. I think we got through quite a range of subjects there. You can listen to this episode of Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or watch it on the Records YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.